Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I know we've got over 500 people logging in today to join us for this webinar. We're presenting from here in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area. So whether you're joining from down the street in West Michigan or across the country, we welcome you today. We thank you for joining us for today's webinar, The Vanishing Workforce. Here at Express, we're always trying to keep a pulse on what's going on in the market, so we're especially excited about today's topic. My name is David Robb. I'm the Director of Operations here at Express Employment Professionals of Grand Rapids. And joining us today is Ron Hetrick, the Director of Staffing Products and Data with Emsi Burning Glass. We're really excited to have him joining us today. Just a quick word about Express before we get going here. Express is a premier workforce solutions provider. The Grand Rapids, Michigan office is one of over 800 franchise locations across North America and the world. And we are always standing ready to help clients with any of their staffing and recruiting needs, as well as training and development, coaching, or HR consulting. A few quick housekeeping items before we get started. We are recording today's presentation, so we get a lot of requests for that. So anyone that registered, you will get a follow-up email later today with a link to the recording with the access instructions, as well as some other follow-up tools and resources. So keep your eyes open for that follow-up email that will come out later today. We also will have plenty of time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation today. So feel free to go ahead and start entering those questions in as you have them. You can use the chat feature or the Q&A feature right on Zoom. And then after Ron is done presenting, I will come back around and facilitate those with him. We're looking forward to a great discussion there. So send those questions in as you have them. So we've got a lot to cover. So I'm going to go ahead and just tell you a quick word about Ron and why he's here today. And then I will turn things over to him. So Ron Hetrick, he is the Director of Staffing Products and Data at Emsi Burning Glass, as I mentioned. And he brings 30 years of labor force experience. He had a 20-year career with Allegis Group, overseeing market analytics and data science, and was a senior and supervisory economist for 8 years with the Bureau of Labor Statistics in Washington, D.C. He's regularly quoted by NBC, CNN, the USA Public Radio, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and numerous other news agencies. Ron has provided analysis for prior Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan, the Council of Economic Advisors to the President, Congress, and numerous Fortune 100 companies and trade associations. Suffice it to say, Ron's an expert on the economy, on economics, especially the workforce. He also is the author of the recently released white paper from Emsi Burning Glass, the Demographic Drought, which is the basis for the presentation today. So real quick, I'll tell you a word about Emsi Burning Glass, and then Ron, I'm going to turn it over to you. So if you're not familiar with Emsi Burning Glass, they provide labor market data to help organizations thrive by first understanding the full picture of what's going on with major trends in jobs, wages, and more. Hundreds of Express offices partner with Emsi Burning Glass so that we can keep a pulse on what's going on in the labor market so that we can successfully create great recruiting and retention strategies for our clients. So it's a partnership we really value, and we're super excited to collaborate on this webinar today. And Ron, I will go ahead and turn it over to you, and I'll see all of you at the end for Q&A. Take it away, Ron.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Give me 1 second. Here we go. So it's crazy to be bringing a message that we're bringing. For those who have read the article, today when we talk about demographic drought, you're going to see a lot of those themes repeated, but with some more context and detail about especially how it fits in a timeline sequence. If you did not read the article, this presentation today will give you a really good primer. I definitely suggest reading the article. It's a lot more detail. We kind of get a lot deeper into some of these things, but suffice it to say that if you kind of watch and pay attention to what we're going through today, you'll have a really good feeling for what's happening. So earlier this year, I was privileged to be a lead author on this article, Demographic Drought, something we called the sansdemic, meaning without people. I know we're all feeling a lot of pain right now, trying to fill positions. And what we want to do is help you understand how did we get to this particular spot. This is something that was coming for quite a while. We were experiencing, but we may have not have noticed. Today, we're going to step through some of these things. So this is how I like to present this information. So if we look at it, we really need to look at what life was like before kind of COVID came in. We need to understand a little bit better as to a lot of things that were already in motion. Because when we get to the current state situation that we're in, this current conundrum that we're in, we can understand that a lot of this is just things that were happening, but we slammed an accelerator pedal down on a lot of demographic factors that we were expecting to take place over a number of years. We decided to kind of do this much more quickly. And we'll explain how these things kind of are going to probably ease up a little bit, but we're in a different place as a country. We're going to talk about where we're heading, and this is going to be a lot around birth rates. This is something that the article really goes into in a lot of detail that we'll cover on this presentation as well. And then the last bit is, what can you do? I'm going to tell you right up front, this is going to be a pretty hard bit of information to receive today. And when we get to the end about what you can do, I'm going to apologize now that we're probably not going to come at you with a lot of like, this is going to solve all of your hiring problems. But we do have some suggestions of how to navigate this kind of labor shortage crisis that we're in, and we'll probably remain in for quite some time. So with that as a background, let's talk about this world pre-COVID. And when we talk about that world, really what we're talking about is this specific population of boomers. They really changed our entire society in the way that we did things. So first off, let's get this generation put down. From 1946 to 1964, they were a massive population going through our labor force. But the thing about them was they were not only big in number, but just in the way that they participated. And what was special about that was the entrance of women. So if you look at this particular slide, you see that, where we at in 1948 with the amount of women in the labor force, and then we were by 1996, you doubled that rate. And that essentially doubled our labor pool. So, at a time that we were growing as a nation, we were adding all of these additional people in. And not only were we adding them in, but these were increasingly educated people. So if you look at that blue line, that's the amount of women in the labor force that with a college education, you can kind of see this enrollment number just jumping up dramatically. So, lagging behind men, now it's in front of men. So you're not only adding a population in, but you're adding a highly educated population in. So now you have two educated populations, because even men, their college degree levels were going up as well. So when you have these additional degrees, you're probably making more money, and that's going to help change the way that we look at the world as well. So in economic terms, we like to look at income in terms of real dollars. So we're adjusting for inflation. So if we go back to 1955, the average median income, our real median income, of households was $5,000. Over a 20-year period from 1955 to 1975, median income at a household level went from $5,000 to $14,000 for a gain of $9,000 over a 20-year period. However, once we add women in, and once we have two people in a household with lifetime earnings, college degree, you see that the impact was absolutely phenomenal to household wealth. This is going to play a factor later on when we look at some things. But just to see that a 20-year period of $9,000 gain followed by a 20-year period of $42,000. So we really transformed ourselves as an economy. But a big part of that was just in this wealth that we were generating. So the problem that you have is you have this double workforce. They're educated, they're driven, they want to upskill. They're competing for jobs because there's a lot of them. So they have to be, really sharp and always with the latest technologies. Well, this was a wave moving through society, but think of this like a tidal wave that was forming out in the ocean, and we really didn't notice it out there because it actually wasn't harming us. It's going through, generating a lot of workers for our workforce. Companies were able to dream the biggest dreams because they could hire anyone they wanted. Highly educated people. But now that tidal wave has reached shore and it's crashing. So look at this right side. This is the number of people that are above the age of 55, age 62 to 75 as we're kind of coming through. And you can see that this is a massive population that has ballooned, and they're all exiting out of the labor force. So what happened? This is before COVID. So literally February of 2020, we hit the lowest unemployment rate we had ever had in history outside of wartime. So that's the first thing we have to know is right before we had COVID and the things related to that, and then the shutdowns and all of these things, we were running at a brutal pace, consuming labor at record levels, a record low unemployment rate. And then this is all pre-COVID as well. We had 7 million job openings, which was an all-time record. When we look at the right side, we had a bunch of people who were out of the labor force who would like to work, but they really couldn't at that time, and only 5.9 million people who were technically unemployed. So basically, you had 2 people for every open job, and one of them couldn't work at this particular point in time. So you really had about a person for every open job. This is all pre-COVID. We also had, with these record job openings, we had increasing quit rates. People had a lot of opportunity, and they were taking advantage of that by using their feet to take on other opportunities. Along with that, we had people who were separating out of the workforce and, did not look to work anymore. So this is literally the amount of people that were out of the workforce who still wanted to have a job. And you can see that number dropping from 7 million to 5 million. And this is a really important graph to look at, because there was a theory that because boomers were educated and because of the situations they were in and they're healthy, they're going to work much longer than people did previously. That is absolutely not true. What happened is these people accumulated a lot of wealth, as we explained earlier. So when they hit retirement ages, they are retiring earlier and they're out of the labor force. They're enjoying the lives that they have. So this was something that was already in motion about people separating and enjoying the earnings that they had made at that point. So as boomers are retiring, the millennials are coming in to replace them as the largest presence of our kind of working age labor force. But that is a different mindset that we're going to see a lot in this particular presentation. So as millennials enter and boomers exit, our labor force participation starts to wane. So what you're looking at here is labor force participation rate. This is a percentage. It is a percentage of the population that engages in the labor force. So they either are employed or they are looking for a job. So that's how you get counted in the labor force. You have to be working or looking to work. You're not going to get counted unless you meet those conditions. So you can see the left side of this, as women are coming in, we see labor force participation just flying with the boomers. Literally, it booms on the left side. And then as millennials come in and kind of take over that particular thing, we see that labor force participation plateaus, and then it starts to wane. Now, shortly before COVID, we were starting to get an improvement, and then that got wiped out. We're going to dig into a lot more details on that in a second. But understand, boomers brought a lot of people in, and they were really interested in working and were engaging. Since they have exited, the generations following them, which is now primarily millennials, I'm a Gen X, and we are a much smaller group, they are less interested in being in that labor force. So this is something that when you look at this, well, why was this occurring? It really is the result of men. And we're going to get into this in much greater detail. But the prime age male, so this is 25 to 54-year-olds. And think about the types of people that you're employing in your job. The jobs that you have open, these are a lot of 25 to 50-year-old men. So we see that their labor force participation had been dropping and then really started to come down. And then for women, it has been kind of undulating. So even when you see that improvement that we had right pre-COVID, that was mostly coming from women. It was not coming from men. So this is another factor that was taking shape. So let's start to get these things organized. So before COVID, we had boomers that were going through the labor force and they were retiring. They were entering the final stage of their career and they're retiring. And then we have labor force participation, which is dropping. Now we add in a third factor, which is the amount of people that were like, I want to work, but I only want to work part-time. So these are people working part-time because they want to. So the Bureau of Labor Statistics breaks this down. You're either part-time because you want to, or you're part-time because you choose to work part-time. You choose to, or you're working part-time because that's the only job that you can find. So we see this incredible increase in the amount of people who want to work part-time versus working full-time. And the group that we really saw this growth in was, once again, prime age men. So these were increasingly prime age men who were saying, I do not want to work full-time. I only want to work part-time. And this was going up at this time. Now we see this illustrated in this incredibly hard to read table. So I'm going to break this table down by looking at one line. If we go down to the left, we're going to start on the left side. This is basically it's data produced by ADP. So on the left side, you have the industries that somebody worked for, and then you can see where they went to work next. So ADP is looking at paychecks and going, they came from a manufacturing industry and they went to an industry over here. So if we look at the manufacturing line and we go to the very end, this is the trade industry, retail trade, wholesale trade. We see that basically a third of people leaving manufacturing were going to retail trade. So flexible hours, a much different type of view. So if we look at even with hotels and restaurants, we see about a little less than 1 in 10 manufacturing people going to that particular industry. So we know manufacturing people were leaving manufacturing to go to things like that have more flexible schedules. But if we flip that around and we go to that final column down there on the left side, trade and transport, you see that only 7 to 8% of people who were in retail trade actually went to manufacturing. So this massive imbalance of people leaving these full-time manufacturing position types of jobs and moving into more of a flexible environment. So it's something that we knew was happening. The BLS data was showing it, but you can kind of see these things even playing out. So these are our factors that were all in place before we even make it to where we are now. So I subtitled this slide. It's not just a perfect storm where we are right now with what's happened in the past year, but it's a hurricane, a tornado, and an earthquake rolled into one. Basically, we took everything that we didn't really want to happen and we combined them into one shot. So here is our primary problem right now. So labor force participation took an enormous plunge as soon as these measures took place. So a lot of people dropping out of the labor force. So these are not people who went to unemployed. These are people who literally are like, I'm out of here until things, get a little better. So we see this drop. Now, the problem that we have on the right side of this graph is that this hasn't moved in a year. So despite vaccinations, despite all of the other things that we've had in the job openings that we're going to get into, labor force participation has not moved in a year. We started to recover and now we're stuck. Here's what else is stuck. So the number of people who are unemployed it went up quickly and it started dropping and then it got stuck. We started getting people back to work and then for whatever reasons that we're going to talk about later, we were not returning them back to work. Then people who are out of the labor force. So we talked about labor force participation, but let's look at this as an actual number. So this right graph, you see that we had around 95 million people who identified as out of the labor force, not looking for a job, not having a job. And you see that number jump as we talked about labor force participation plunged. It starts to go down and then it stops. And if you add those numbers up, that's about 5 to 6 million people who have not come back into the labor force who dropped out. That is a huge, huge problem. We're missing 5 to 6 million people who have completely disappeared. And then we have this kind of remaining excess unemployed that we have right now. So when you have all of these types of things, we get record job postings. Now, this graph actually needs updated with more dismal information than what we have. So as of when we created this graph, it was 9.2 million job postings. And if you remember in the opening section, 7 million before COVID was an all-time record. We've destroyed that record. As of yesterday, the new number is over 10 million job openings. So we say job postings, but this is actually job openings. These are not postings. So these are the amount of openings that we have in the country right now. So we have skyrocketed and it's only getting worse. Now, one of the biggest problems that we're having is there's a misunderstanding about who we are as a nation. And this is something that I always use this to illustrate. So years ago, there was a gentleman named Hans Rosling who wrote a book called Factfulness. In that book, Hans Rosling basically would go around to universities, highly educated people, trade associations, and he would give them a kind of questionnaire and he would ask them questions about the world. He would say, hey, what is what the birth rates for women in Africa, or how much of the world is illiterate and how much of the world lives in poverty? And when people would answer those questions, they answered them with answers that were consistent with the way the world was in the 1960s, but not even close to the reality of where we were in the 2010s. So it's just this complete disconnect about the way the world really was now versus what people thought of it. And I think that's the exact same thing we see in the US. For years, we always said the average Joe. The average Joe in the US is that blue collar worker. They're the ones we've got to think of as that blue collar worker. They don't have a college degree and we're looking out for them. But that is simply not at all true about who we are. So if we look at our labor force over the age of 25, we see that the vast majority of people at least have an associate's degree. Not only do they have these degrees, associates and bachelors, but if you look at the labor force participation rate, it's much, much higher for people who have degrees than people who don't. So if you look at those extremes, you have a 44% participation rate for people who don't have at least a high school diploma. versus a 72% labor force participation rate for people who have a bachelor's degree. So we have this incredibly educated country. The problem that we have is the amount of job openings that we have are 2/3 not needing a college degree. So these would be jobs, manufacturing, construction, retail trade, hotels and restaurants. These are driving our economy. We are a service-based economy where you all want to be served. However, the people that would be filling these jobs don't exist. We have changed as a country. So we only have around 3.4 million unemployed people who have at least at most a high school diploma versus these openings that we have. So you have 2/3 of your job openings not needing people with a college degree, but we have a majority of our people on the unemployed side are coming from this educated side. So we are really stuck right now. It's why everywhere you drive around, everybody, now their signs keep getting more and more and more competitive. I drove by a McDonald's yesterday, it was $15 an hour. You know, they're begging for workers because they're trying to find out how are we going to get people to come to these jobs? Well, those people don't exist. That's why you're not getting them. So the way we solved this in the past was through immigration. But immigration for a number of years has been declining. And as you can see, these numbers were dropping off fairly dramatically. In 2020, because of COVID and closed borders, we cemented the doors shut and we did not basically have immigration at the end of 2020. So if you look at the fact that even back in 2016, you're getting 600,000 immigrants, and then you look at the fact that in 2020, it was around 200,000 that we brought in, those numbers are not, we're going to get better in 2021, but we're not probably ever going to go back to even where we were before because the world is changing in the way we do this. So we're going to see some of that later on in this particular deck, but I did want you to understand that we feel pain, obviously, because we as a country are not really kind of who we think we are. And another problem is that the people that we've relied to take a lot of these service jobs did not enter the country last year, and they've been at an increasing rate not entering. So just be aware of that as well. So when we look at what's happening right now, and I did a blog and I shot some video on this last year, but what kind of made everything really intensify when we basically what we've been experiencing over the past year, because we see these things like labor force participation stuck, unemployed barely dropping off, all of these things happening, but they're not happening to the degree that we would really like. So we have to understand what happened. So first off, now this slide needs updated because we did have another basically million gain after a million. So we are getting closer to recovering the jobs that we had. But the important thing that I wanted to point out here was this was not a normal recession. We caused this recession. Usually a recession is something that is resulting in a correction. So something gets overheated, like the housing market around 2007 to 2009. We correct for that and you go through a recession. The gas industries in the 70s with what happened there, things get overheated, supply happens, we end up with a recession. So this is something more economic based. However, in this particular case, we electively shut down an economy. So these people that were let go, 80% of them were like, look, I'm going to get my job back. So that's the first thing is we have a mindset of people saying, I don't need to immediately find a job. I'm going to eventually find something. So I'm okay. I'm going to sit on the sidelines. So while they sat on the sidelines, we created some programs to basically give them assistance to have them, not have to go back to work for a lot of good reasons. A lot of things there, but I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but just to say that we created two programs, one PUA, which is Pandemic Unemployment Assistance, and then Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation. If you look at the payouts that we're doing right now, the majority of the payouts that we have are these pandemic related programs. So those pandemic programs are supposed to wrap up in early September, but we have been distributing this money fairly regularly. We also, of course, had the CARES Act, which was distributing checks to everyone, including myself. And then, of course, you have unemployment insurance and expanded unemployment benefits. Now, a lot of things are people saying, well, as soon as we terminate these expanded unemployment benefits, we're going to be a lot better off. But the reality is that is actually a really small percentage of the total amount of checks that we're issuing right now. So we have all of these people collecting these checks. We have these record number of job openings. So the question I keep getting is, well, when we stop the pandemic aid, are things going to get back to normal? In other words, as the year goes on, is this going to get better? Is everybody going to start coming back? And we've certainly seen some encouraging things in the past 2 months with improved job reports. Here's the problem. this money that we did, these CARES Act things, all of these benefits went directly to people. So these are not things kind of distributed to businesses or anything to create jobs. These, like we would typically do in other recoveries, we literally put this money straight into the pockets of people. So this put 4 trillion excess dollars into our economy. So if you go along this graph, you can see back, through a long period of time, we were running at around a 4 trillion case. But we have changed the picture. We have thrown a lot of money into the economy and we gave it directly to people. And where we see that is in median household income. So remember, we were talking earlier about how household income had gained when women came in and college degrees came in. Well, this is kind of what things look like recently. And last year, we sent this into the stratosphere. So households have an enormous amount of money. They were already doing really well. Now they're doing exceptionally well. So the average person is now a lot better off than they had been even before pandemic level hit. A particular population that this matters to is the boomers. So we talked about the tidal wave, and it's going through and boomers are retiring, and we're trying to deal with the aftermath of that. Last year, because of fear, because of how incredibly well the stock market did, people who were on the edge, teetering on retirement, started getting great returns. They looked at everything. They're like, look, and I'm not going back into this labor market. I'm out of here. I'm retiring. So this goes back to our labor force participation rate dropping and not coming back. We know that a proportion of this are because boomers at an unbelievable rate, probably to the tune of about 1 million to 1.5 million, dropped out and they're done. They retired. So we knew that this was happening, but we were anticipating it happening over the next several years, but we crushed that accelerator down and caused it all at one time. Yet another shock to the system. This is a really discouraging survey that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce did in May. So what they did is they went back and they found 9.3 million people who lost their jobs originally. So these are people who had lost their jobs at the time that we did these initial shutdowns. And then they've said, okay, well, this is as of this year now. And remember, we talked about flatlining on a number of these things and them not improving. They said, well, what is your situation? When are you going to look for a job? And if we look at that number on the right side, of that 9.3 million, 13%, 1.2 million said, I'm never coming back. I'm done. I'm not going back to work. Now, we do know that probably you have a lot of boomers in that number who had these or that excess retire, but I think there's going to be some other people in that number as well. Then we have 1.6 million people saying, we're going to return, but not in 2021. Like, we'll come back next year. We're not going to come now, but we eventually are going to come back. So, we've already taken a chunk out right there. Then we have this kind of group that I don't even know how you call this, but we have 3.5 million people who say, yeah, I'm going to come back to work. But they're not actually looking for a job. They're just saying that they are planning on coming back. They haven't actually said, they are saying that I'm probably going to come back this year, but they're not doing anything about that. So we have now accounted for basically 2/3. And then we have 3 million of those people saying, yes, I'm actually looking for a job right now. So when we talk about these numbers flatlining and not getting better, that is part of our problem. Is we have a significant number of people who use the actions of the past year either to completely separate or separate enough that there's no sense of urgency. I believe that there's no sense of urgency because of the financial situation. You only do things because you can. So if I'm basically about to get evicted and I really need money, I take a job. If my family's starving to death and I need money, I have to take a job. But there are reasons why people can disengage, and that may play as a part of it. It's not going to be pure, but there is certainly a part of it that is that. Another enormous problem that we have, especially if you're a company out there employing prime age men, is opioid deaths and addiction. So we had set an all-time record for opioid deaths last year. A lot of people were afraid to go to their treatment centers. They were isolated. So we shot that through the roof. That's a number we did not want to see a record level on. That's 93,000. So we're talking almost another 100,000 people. Most of these are prime age men. If you study opioid deaths, it typically is, I think the average is around a 25-year-old male that we typically see these things in. So not only are you dealing with death, but we also have an enormous amount of people who are out of the labor force because they're dealing with addiction at some level. And our estimate is around somewhere between 800,000 and 900,000 prime age men in particular that are out of the labor force because they're fighting addiction or they just can't get themselves in a position to take steady work. So a lot of really heavy, pretty awful information there. that we're talking about with these boomers kind of accelerating their retirement, the problem of will we get these people back in and how motivated are they to come back in? You know, people are trying all kinds of things now to try to get them re-engaged, and it's not really working. And then, of course, you know, this issue that we have with prime age men, not only with addiction, but just like, look, I'll work, but, you know, I don't know if I want to work full time. You know, I think, you know, last month we had almost 1 million job gain. 1 out of every 3 of those jobs were in restaurants and entertainment places, you know, part-time work. The people that are coming back in, choosing to do those jobs, only a very tiny number of those were actually in manufacturing or construction. Or temporary help. Those combined were 50,000. 50,000 of the almost 950,000 gain that we had, 50,000 of that combined was manufacturing, construction, and temp help. So we get this 380,000 increase in like eating and drinking places and entertainment places, but we're not getting it in the jobs that I think a lot of people on here are trying to hire for. So what does the future look like? So this has been pretty hard so far. Unfortunately, the future is not very bright. So the biggest problem that we have, and what we really, the main focal point of demographic drought, was that we have not been having children. We have not been having children for a very, very long time, basically since the early 1970s. We dropped below our replacement rate of 2.1. So you can see that boomer number, we were almost 4. You know, the average woman having 4 children over the course of that time span of having children. And now we've been hovering around 1.7. So we really have not been replacing ourselves for a long period of time. Just so you can see this illustrated, if we go back to 2003 even, the states in blue on the left side are the ones who were at least having births at a replacement level. So minimum a replacement level. If you are red, that means that you were not having births at a replacement level. On the right side, when we look at this in 2017, we are down to basically Utah and South Dakota, not our 2 most populous states. They were the only ones that were at replacement level in 2017. And you see a lot of places, especially the Northeast, really struggling. This is something, if you study the Northeast, there's a lot of problem there with the populations getting very old and they do not have young people there. But you can see the country had really turned. Well, then we had last year with COVID, and because a lot of women were afraid, like, what if there's a complication? I have to go to the hospital. Just people stopped having children. So we set the all-time record low for our country. We dropped down about 1.6. And that point, that just percentage points, those tiny little percentage point, 10th percentage points represents hundreds and hundreds of thousands of babies that were not born last year. So this is something that, you know, a lot of people thought, well, we're all locked down together, we're probably going to have a baby boom. And the answer was profoundly no. It was the exact opposite. At a time that we really couldn't stand to do that, we really hurt ourselves even more last year with what happened. So that's something that we have to take into account as well. So if we look at 2010 to 2020, the amount of population growth that we had, it looks like what it did back in the Great Depression. So right after the Great Depression ends, a lot of people, because they were afraid of having children because they may not be able to feed them and times were so tough, we had a really low birth rate for over those particular years. I mean, this is called the silent generation. It's a lot smaller generation. Those were hard times. Now we're in really good times, but people just simply aren't having children. So we had incredibly small growth. And we're going to look at how that even breaks down farther. So if we go from 2011 to 2021 and we say, this is your working age population, these are the people that you put to work, and we look over a decade from 2011 to 2021, this is what it looks like visibly. So if you look on this graph, anything that red says that where you live, your working age population got smaller. You have less people to employ now than you did in 2011. And there is a lot of red on this graph. So if you're like, you know, and we understand like this is working age population. So there are people going to be moving. We do know, obviously, people are moving to Florida, people are moving to Texas. You know, you do see that represented. So there are some of this is not just because you didn't have children. A lot of this may be just people moving to different areas. So you're like, wow, I see a lot of red on here. That's discouraging. Well, maybe we have a chance that the people coming up next, those under 15, that'll help us get better. And the answer is not really. It's a little better in some parts of the country. Find where you are on the map. If it's red, it means that not only has your working age population declined, but what's coming next, who's coming next into your labor force, those younger people, that if you're in red, that means you're going to decline even farther as we project things going forward. So if you're a college on here, I'm sorry, this is something that colleges are having to face. Low birth rates mean some changes are on the horizon. An article came out a couple of weeks ago. South Korea, which we have, we're going to show some data on in a little bit. They have an incredibly low birth rate, so much lower than the U.S. They're now shutting down a lot of elementary schools, combining the schools that they have because there simply aren't any children to put in those schools. We are going to face that same reality here in the U.S. Enrollment has been dropping. This is a historical view from 2012 to 2020. We lost 2 million people going into college. I don't mean to insult anybody's children, but you probably noticed that universities were accepting a lot more people than they have historically because they're desperately trying to fill up their classes right now because there's just simply not people there to enroll. And if we look forward over the next several years, that is projected to continue to fall. So what does this look like? And this is a graph where all you have to do is pay attention to the right side of this graph. This is literally our actual number of people for each age that we can go from the age 22 down to the age of just being born to the year of 1 year old. And if you look at this, what you see is a very slow, every now and then it's okay, but a very slow tapering off. So this means that every single year we have less and less and less people that will be coming up and then going to college or going into our labor force. So it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So we have these existing problems of our labor force shrinking as we're trying to replace the boomers. This is only going to get worse. I mean, this is 22 years. So we now have 22 years into the future that we can look at and say it's going to get worse about 22 years consecutively for where we are now. And there's no reason to suggest that this is going to change anytime soon. So we know that we're kind of in a permanent situation here. What this means is you are now going to have a very upside down population of people who need to be supported, people trying to retire, to leave the labor force, being supported by people who are still working. This is something we talked about for years, especially with the boomers aging and then lower labor force participation. We're already in kind of this plunge that we see right now. If you go into around 2020, where this thing breaks into the red, you can see that we're really on this downward spiral. This is only going to continue to get worse. By 2100, we're saying only 60% of our population will be within working age. So this just means that you have a smaller group of people supporting those people who are no longer in the labor force. If you want to see this played out in real time, all you have to do is look at China right now. They had a one-child policy. I don't think they really thought about, well, what's this going to mean for our future when all of our population starts to get older and we do not have a population there to earn or something to keep the economy moving and to support it while it's aging. Same with Japan. Japan's had an insanely low birth rate for a couple of decades. They are now, people are working into their late 70s over in Japan just to keep the economy moving because they do not have the people there. So this is where I was heading. So there's this concept of the world, there's still tons and tons of people out there. Boy, if we would just open our borders, we would have this huge flood of people. And the reality is when we talk about these things, even when they talk about some of these reports, we are not talking about millions of people that we need. We're still talking about, hundreds of thousands that would potentially be coming in. The world's birth rate has been plunging. And like I said earlier, we're a service-based economy. We're trying to get people to come in and serve us. And these people, when we're not making them, we try to go basically get them from other places. But if you look at all of the developed nations sitting at the bottom of this graph, Korea, Italy, Japan, a lot of Europe, Sweden, Germany's down at that bottom as well. They are all in the exact same situation that we're in. They are desperately trying to find a labor force to replace the people that they do not have. So we're all trying to find these people to take them on to help alleviate the problems that we have. But yet the world's birth rate has been falling. I was talking about immigration had been waning over the years. Part of it is because these countries simply do not have the populations that we thought. The other thing about it is, sticking with what Hans Rosling said, if you actually go and look at the unemployment rates of a lot of countries that we consider to be kind of third world low skill, you'll see that their unemployment rates are actually in the 4 to 5 percentage point thing. These are not countries where everybody's destitute. That was true 40, 50 years ago, but their economies have matured. They need their people to grow forward. India is a great example of that. We've been getting a lot of people from India over the years, but if you Google it, you'll find lots of articles about India saying they have an IT labor shortage over here. They're trying to mature their economy as well, and they need these people. So our ability to just say we're going to take and we're going to take is running out on us. We have to face this problem. So this brings us to the what you can do. We've told you these things were in motion. They got worse. They will get better. There will be people re-engaging. We saw that even in that 9.3 million people that were, still coming back, that there was at least a third of those people who are like, look, I'm looking for a job right now. And maybe another third that says, yeah, eventually I'm going to come back this year. So we know that things will get better, but we're not going to go back to even where we were prior to COVID. It's probably going to be worse than that was. So we call where we were prior to COVID bad. We went to horrible, and now we're going to recover back to where somewhere less than bad, because we lost a lot of these boomers and they're not coming back in. So it's going to really be intense here, probably for a very, very long time, as we've been explaining. So what can you do? So here are some short-term and long-term things. First off, my least favorite one is raising wages. Anybody who's played this game knows that it's a fight to the death. I call it game say brutality, where one company raises their wages and the next one's like, wait a minute, I can't stand to lose my people, so they raise, and you go back and forth. It's not a long-term solution. It's an attempt to try to get somebody in your door to do something, but it's not solving your problems. It's just a very temporary Band-Aid that gets ripped off the second somebody else pays a little bit more. But you can do that. In fact, not raising wages just means you're not going to be competitive. So we know you have to do those things. But just as my least favorite of these things, but like I said, you have to be competitive. To the middle one, anyone on here is still writing lengthy job descriptions. Understand those lengthy job descriptions were a privilege given to you by the boomer population. When you have a lot of people and you have a lot of qualified people, you can get really detailed in what you want, knowing that somebody out there is probably going to have this. And maybe there's a lot of people who apply, and I'm going to pick the very best. Well, we are not in that situation right now. I recommend getting rid of anything from that job description that isn't absolutely the most core fundamental, and making everything else nice to have. Get people in the door and talk to them. Find driven people. And then on the right side, get them quickly up to speed. Brag about how good you train people. Get them, have a world-class training program. Because of the boomers, especially in the early 2000s, I watched companies getting rid of their training programs left and right. They were laying off their trainers. They were literally just like, we don't need these people around anymore. And now we have an enormous problem in this country where we're like, we want people to be ready-made. We want them to have everything we've ever dreamed of, but we're not willing to train them. Why? Well, if we train them, then they're just going to take a job elsewhere. Well, then that tells me a lot about who you are as a company and a lot less about the people. Do the training, but impassion these people with your culture. Find out what you love about this company, interview people well, make sure they're fired up, and then you invest in them. And you have a training program that doesn't cost you a ton of money, but gets people ready to go much quicker. In the long term, and I can't stress this enough, I feel like this is all I've been talking about with people later. The one on the left side here, a workforce conversation that we're having. When we talk about this demographic drought, I am very dismayed when I talk to people who are HR people who are fighting this battle almost on their own. I just talked to a person in the healthcare industry over the weekend, and she was saying that her boss is like, where is everybody? Why aren't we filling these jobs? And I'm like, your boss seriously doesn't understand what's happening right now? Like, they literally think you don't know how to do your job all of a sudden. And my biggest fear in the staffing industry, and for a lot of people, is that they go, you must not be effective anymore. Where are the people that we used to get? I know job boards were being contacted, and there were people who were saying, are these broken? No, we're not getting any applicants. This tells me that companies have not made this an executive conversation. They're forcing this conversation to be had way too low in the organization. This needs to be done at a high level. What are you going to do as an organization to address this? You have a plan for how you're going to build new products. You have a plan for the kind of customers that you want to attract. What is your plan for how you're going to deal with a labor shortage? What if it permanently changes the way that you need to do your job? What if you need to start combining roles? Maybe bring an industrial engineer and reinvestigate, how are you actually utilizing labor? How can you get more efficient in the way that you utilize labor? This is not going away. You're not going to wait this out. That is a suicidal behavior at this particular point in time. And if you're thinking, well, the robots are coming, I'm going to use robots, that is also, please don't think that that is a realistic option, at least not for the next 10 to 20 years. We can't even get the people in the plants to build the robots, let alone get robots to a point where they could do more service level jobs. Most of our investments in robotics are still occurring in auto manufacturing, in semiconductor manufacturing. It's not occurring for the jobs that a lot of people are looking at as being really labor intensive. The one in the middle here, have career paths ready for people that you really like. Get people moving along quickly. Do not let people, I know you can't let everybody quit, and some people are unrealistic, and some people you may just not like, but we cannot have the same lax attitude about They quit. Why? Was it something that could have been addressed? Is somebody else going to leave for the same reason? Was there no career path? Was it their boss they didn't like? Are there things that you could fix to keep people engaged? Because this idea that you're going to let somebody go and just go grab another is silliness. Like, that is not happening. There's no guarantee that the person coming in will be as remotely qualified as the person that you just lost and will be able to reach the levels that that person had. We did that for forever because we had a skilled workforce, but we are increasingly not having that here. The last part on the right side is, and I can't stress this enough, I'm a big fan of it, partnering with prisons. So if you're in an industry that doesn't need like college diplomas or things like that, talk to the prison systems of your particular state, talk to the governments. They have a lot of programs. They take on a certain amount of risk. They want these people employed. It's a huge group, especially of prime age men that we're missing that are employable. So talk to these agencies and see, hey, look, can we start like a training program there, and then we'll have them work so many hours, and then when they're discharged, we can have them engage full time. See what you can do around that. In the past, you may have been like, look, we're not doing that. That's risky and everything. But I'm saying anything that you can do to widen the pool, to make that pool deeper of the workers that you're going to get from, do those things. Talk to high schools, get kids excited at a younger age about the possibilities. Hey, you don't have to do this. You don't have to go to college. With our thing, what we're doing here, we can get you to these earnings levels so much quicker. Let me actually show you the graph of where you're going to be earning 5 years from now if you come in through this career path with us. You've got to intercept people quicker. You can't sit and just think that they're waiting for you. You've got to go to them. And that is my presentation. I'm going to open the floor back. I see a lot of things came in on questions. Let's go ahead and let's see what everybody has.
All right, Ron, thank you so much. Well, I bet you wish you got to deliver some good news once in a while on some of these presentations. But I just want to make the point that this information it's just so critical. It's so vital. And the outlook, it definitely has its challenges as you've gone through today. But that first step in really being successful as an employer, as you mentioned, you really have to understand what's going on. Everyone in the organization has to understand what's going on. And that's the first step in making a strategy to still be successful. I love the point you made that it has to go up to the executive level with that awareness. I'd also make the point it has to go down to the line lead or team lead level too, because you need people holding on and retaining people across all levels of the organization. I loved just a couple of points I really like to highlight here, Ron, is I love the points how you made. You really want to invest in your people, focus on retention, focus on training and development, widen your doors. One thing we talk a lot about to our clients is becoming an employer of choice. And I really think that's going to be someone's best competitive advantage. Before, it might have been innovation, it might have been your technology, but becoming that employer of choice is going to let you win in this talent crisis that we're seeing right now. And to one other point, that is why we launched our training and development division about 7 years ago, because we saw this talent crisis looming on the forecast. We didn't know it was going to turn into what it is now. But we saw companies had to start doing more than just hiring. They had to be able to train and develop talent they needed. You had to train leaders so you could retain that talent. And that's something that we try and help our companies do from the recruiting to the retention side. So we've got a ton of really good questions coming in here, Ron. I'm just going to start running through these. I'm sure you're seeing the chat just blowing up here. But to start, we've got a question about wages, and someone's asking, is the wage growth that we're seeing right now going to slow down anytime soon? I mean, we're seeing hyperinflation recently from our perspective. What's going to happen?
Oh, okay. So I wrote that demographic drought. I have a paper. This was not even we didn't seed these questions. So that question's really crazy. I have a paper coming out, I believe, maybe August 20th on wage inflation that I wrote in the past month. And basically the point being that wages are sticky. So if anybody remembers their economics classes in college, wages are sticky. So they go up, but they really don't come down. You just basically set a new floor. Now, sometimes you get these hyper cases, but usually that's with bonuses. People pay like $20,000 bonuses. But when you see wages go up, they typically don't come down. Do I believe that these will mitigate? Yes, they're going to have to, because people eventually will spend themselves through the floor. It's so discouraging. I don't know why. Some people know me personally. I take this stuff so personally when I see these fast food places, and they're, like I said, I went by that one with $15 an hour, and it breaks my heart because that comes from a place of pain. People are pushing themselves to boundaries that we've never seen. And what happens is eventually those wages are going to intercept that associate's degree job. So these people who were taking, maybe have a college degree, an associate's degree, who are doing certain jobs, what's going to happen is eventually we've got to entice those people. So you're going to see at some point a wage equilibrium that starts to pull people from other occupations. I think that's what you're going to see. That's going to play out probably, I think the rest of this year, it looks really nasty. It doesn't help us at all with this dang on Delta variant. And I live in Florida. I'm in Idaho right now, but I live in Florida. And I know that this, has some people, well, I was going to come back, but now I'm afraid again. We can't, fear is the biggest enemy because it's keeping people from getting re-engaged. So that is a really good question, but I do think it will start to mitigate, but absolutely get ready for like your Big Mac's going to cost you $8 to $10. That is a reality that cannot be undone. I'm still surprised when I see dollar menus at some of these places. I'm like, that has got to be murdering these places right now because their input costs are going up so much. But yeah, I think it will continue on, but I think at some point it becomes a little ludicrous. And my feeling is anytime you get over $18 an hour for some of these, if you're literally just sitting there as a cashier, to me, that I feel like we've lost a little something. But people are trying to entice people back in the labor force. And so far, it's not working. If anybody saw the thing that came out of Forbes, they actually went to people and said, if we gave you a $30,000 pay increase, would you come work in the office versus working remote? And a shocking number of people are like, nope, not for $30,000. They wouldn't even leave the remote setting. So it just goes to tell you where people's mindsets are at.
Yeah, definitely. And that was one question I want to follow up on here is, a lot of the issues you talked about, population was one, but labor force was another one. Is there anything we can do to increase those participation rates?
Yeah. So here's my biggest thing. I probably should have pointed this out a little bit more in that deck. When I talked about the part-time thing, there's a dynamic there that I really want to make sure we discuss. And I heard a question earlier. Somebody said, how do we entice people back into manufacturing? And my answer to that is you do things that you never would have thought you had to do, because you have to do them. And this is making that world look a little bit more like the world that people are gravitating towards. So let's say that this is something I'm encouraging companies to do. When you put out postings, try putting out several different types of postings. Post for full-time, post the exact same job, but do it as a flexible schedule and see the kind of activity that you get. When you get these people on flexible schedule who want the flexible schedule, you're not allowed to ask them certain personal questions. We get that part. But there are some things that you can get to know about them. There's some things people may volunteer, but even when you say, what's enticing you about this position? And they go, well, it entices me about the flexibility. I've got a child that I cannot get care for 5 days a week. I need something that's more flexible. Start to do these types of things. You need to start conducting real world experiments, and we have to stop this. Well, we tried this once and it didn't work. Like, I can't stand when people do that. We tried it and it didn't work. It's like, figure out what didn't work, fix it, and do it again. But don't just dismiss things completely. So one thing is flexibility. Learn more about flexibility. What does flexibility mean to people? Is it the standard hours that are killing them? Is it the fact that it has to be this number of hours? Like, what is it that's the block to keep these things from happening? And feel it out. Maybe there's some things that you can adjust, or maybe there's some things you can do. Having a person with 20 hours is better than having 0 hours when the person beside that had the job that they're killing themselves on is now going to quit because they're so overworked. Quit rates are way up if you're not paying attention. Hospitals, restaurants, people are like, I've had enough. I'm done. I can't take this abuse. I'm dying here. And they're quitting. So getting anybody into help is great. Figure out ways of getting people help, or you're going to lose more and more people.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point.
Anything else of the flexibility? I just say flexibility is probably my biggest go-to right now.
Yeah. And I think, a lot of companies are in a tough spot because they feel like they can't offer that because they're so short-staffed. But it's kind of like the chicken before the egg. You've got to overcome and offer that just so you can get back to a better level, right? So we've got a ton of questions here. I do just want to remind everyone, we are going to send out the recording of this. I know we were plowing through stuff really fast, but you saw there was a lot to cover. So we're going to send out the recording. We're going to send out the whole white paper that this is all based on. So you have all those stats. So just to remind you on that. Oh, wait, another question here, kind of on the other end of the spectrum, background checks and drug screens.
Yep.
But now that marijuana is legal in a bunch of states, what do we got to do with background checks and jug screens, Ron?
Yeah, I was really blown away when Amazon finally just fessed up. Like Amazon had 50,000 job openings and they weren't filling them. And you think about Amazon's out there literally like, we can spend whatever we have. We've got a lot of money, so we'll just pay whatever. And they do that and they still aren't getting people. And at that point, they're like, okay, let's figure out why. And then they found out a lot of people were failing the marijuana screening. So they're like, you know what, forget it. Forget the marijuana screening. Just please don't show up high and we'll go on from there. Now, I hate to say this, but I had been saying that for a long period of time before there. I was like, look, some of these background checks are going back so long and people are failing out because of the amount of time. And I would say really look at these types of things. I cannot believe how many people we're not even letting participate in the workforce because of things. And I'm like, look, I fully understand risk. I fully understand that there are risks to things that we're asking people to do. But would you rather have someone who, failed marijuana screening, but shows up for work every single day and actually does their job? And if they don't do their job, you can always get rid of them. But would you rather give that, or would you rather take the existing person you have and work them to death and then they quit? This is something you have to think through. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but what I'm saying is look at some of these things and go, look, is this really helping us? Or at this point, is it just hurting us? Because we're not even getting a chance to see what happens if we don't do it. So here's my suggestion, just like the job posting thing, try things out, see how they work. If they don't work over a period of time, correct things, figure out how you can get better at them, but do not blanket do this. This is my whole point about bring this to an executive level. You've got to change the way that you think about workers. And that's not going to happen. HR is not going to be allowed to change that policy without executive approval. But if the executives understand, hey, look, when we tried this out and we removed this, we actually could get this number more people through, bring some evidence into it. Those are the kind of things that are really only going to be fixed if we're all having a conversation.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of, along some similar lines that this has come up. What about childcare? Is the childcare issue, is that a big factor with women leaving the labor force? Do we think that's going to get better with COVID stuff phasing out? What are your thoughts on the childcare issue? Yeah, the huge problem we have right now is a lot of our job openings are actually in childcare. So it's not a matter of just people saying, well, I can't come back. I'm not sure what to do with my children. It's a matter of people aren't even there in the childcare industry. So even if you wanted to have childcare, it's hard to find people to do that. Here's where, if you're a large company, this is going to be different than if you're small. But I think there has to be ways that large companies can come alongside of people and say, look, we know of this childcare place in town. We're actually helping them to get workers. We're helping them support this work. We can get them higher pay levels to help get these people in the door. We are working with places. You don't have to build your own childcare center. There are places out there. A lot of them just need to have people just like you do. So I think that there are ways that companies can partner. It would be great if a couple of companies went in and just said, look, we all invest in this childcare center and we make sure that they have the best facilities and they get these workers. And we encourage anybody who comes to work from us, we've got X number of openings in this center. And if they get too many, we're going to help them to open up another center. This is the kind of thing. We don't take these burdens as an individual. Everybody on these calls, when you've got to partner with people, it's a different world. And I hope that if there's anything you understand, like we're hammering the fact that this is not going to get better. It'll get better than where we are right now, but it's not going to get great ever again. We're in a different world now. So you got to think really creatively. If at the executive level, you can have these conversations, but just some things there around that. Yeah, definitely. I want to give one shout out to a participant here who actually just commented on that. They said, we actually created midday part-time positions to accommodate candidates who need less hours due to childcare, school closings, conflict with spouses' schedules, or single parents who can't work full-time. So that's a great example. If you get creative, the traditional schedule isn't working, maybe you target a portion of the workforce that could work on a certain schedule and you go after that. So really good example there. That's awesome. Oh, wait, we've got a ton of questions. We're getting close to 1 o'clock, but I'll keep doing a couple more questions here. If you have to log out, that's fine, but we got a lot of good questions. So we'll keep some conversation going here. One question here, you kind of touched on this, but what industries do you see struggling the most as we move forward with this information?
Yeah, I think the standard 40-hour week is really hurting. Companies that are doing remote have figured out a way of at least helping with the STEM problem. That was an out for them. Part-time, if you're a restaurant, you got to be low. I mean, think about it. I'm paying $15 an hour. We used to pay assembly people $11, $12 an hour. if we were like really generous. Now you can go work, a 30-hour work week. You've got, if you read the article, I talk about video games, like especially with prime age men, they want to play video games, especially 21 to 30 years old. This is not a joke. It's in the article. I highly suggest you read it. It's shocking to look at. But you are basically giving these people an opportunity to go, well, I stay up till 2:30 in the morning. I don't want to be at a job at 7 a.m., doing this particular type of thing. So I think that, we have to start to picture this world of who are we trying to engage? And I can't get rid of their idiosyncrasies. And I hate the word pander because it's like, well, I'm pandering. I'm not going to bend to them. It's like, well, bend or don't get anyone and just stick to your guns and keep your building empty. And it's going to feel really good. Like, I hate it. I hate that I'm even having this conversation. I mean, I'm a strong work ethic person. I brought that into my children, the same type of thing. But it's not, this is a complicated world we live in. And people have some great reasons for why they can't engage in certain full-time types of things. So I think if you're doing that traditional full-time, especially really labor-intensive jobs that are just so hard to do. In fact, when you see these people doing these jobs, thank them. It's like we've been thanking the military for years, as we should, but I think I went through a drive-through at McDonald's recently. I thanked the person who was working there. I'm like, we have to appreciate that people will even take these types of things on. And that's the other part of it. Value those people I talked about. Don't let people quit. When somebody does take these jobs and they're killing it, man, take care of them. Better to pay that person a little bit more and bend some of your rules on that, then let them go. And then you go out and find the next person that you had to pay more for anyway. And they're not near as good as the person that you just lost. But that all kind of works in this big continuum of it's going to be a struggle, to fill some of these traditional full-time roles at the lower end, because as I showed you, 3.4 million people to 6 million job openings, they're picking these flexible, awesome opportunities for themselves and looking at the other ones going, hey, that looks like a lot of work. I don't want to do that when I can make just as much doing less.
Yeah, people definitely have a lot of options right now, right? So you've got to make it look appealing. So those entry-level workers, they're like our new line of essential workers, really, that we really got to start valuing. And as customers value them, but as employers too, right? I mean, it's more important than ever. It's something you should always be valuing your employees, but it's really essential now. Well, I want to hit two more questions here, Ron. They're kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. So the first one is a comment on the deficit. So we saw the 4 trillion in spending. As we kind of come to a peak here with the demographic issues, what's going to happen with the increasing government deficit? Is that going to also be another factor that's going to impact us down the road? What are your thoughts?
I don't even know what to say at this point. I have been an economist my whole career, as has been explained. I started the Bureau of Labor Statistics. This is all I've done. Now I will be, my specialty is labor economics, and there are certain things that I will claim I don't have fully figured out. One of them is I don't know how a Federal Reserve can put $4 extra trillion into economy and then tell everyone that they're not concerned about inflation. If we look at, we can find 4 other countries that did this similar type of thing. All of that ended in financial calamity. The difference with the U.S. is that there are a lot of countries in the world that are invested in not letting us fail. So I think there's some aspects with that. If the U.S. economy went down, basically we take everybody with us. So I think there's some things there, but we cannot escape the fact that this money is there. We can't escape the fact that even with where we're going right now, there's talks of even more kind of financial support coming through. I will just claim to say that I cannot figure out how we get out of this without feeling a tremendous amount of pain. I'm just watching it from the sidelines like others. I don't want to play the calamity card, but I can't. I'm trying to figure out how this happens. You've got to get $4 trillion out of the economy. And then the fact that you did that when we weren't making any, by the way, we were giving checks out, but no one was working. So we weren't collecting any taxes during this entire time. We still have all of these people out who aren't re-engaging, not paying payroll taxes. And yet we're still issuing money. It's PUA and PEUC. I don't have any concept for how this could be funded through pure debt hit. So I just look at it and I go, you have to pay the price eventually. I mean, it wouldn't be fair if you didn't pay the price. So, it's something we just got to keep our eyes on, but it certainly doesn't look good from this perspective.
Yeah, definitely a factor we've got to consider. Okay, maybe more on a positive note here. You touched on this a little bit, but talk about technology, talk about automation. Like, I know it's not going to save
Yeah.
everything, but how is that going to help over the next couple of years and the next decades?
Yeah, I think near term, there's no hope. I've been writing and speaking on automation for a while. And my biggest problem with it was we had a really dangerous article that was written a number of years ago called Rise of the Robots. And people were like, we're all going to lose our jobs. It's going to be robotics. And I remember at the time going, you should be on your knees praying that we come up with robots that would replace our jobs, because you have no concept for how the developed world is about to lose workers. And like I tried to say in this presentation, the US is actually not as bad as a number of other countries. It's way worse in these other countries. They don't have them either. It's called collaborative robotics. So collaborative means that these things are actually considering what's going on and responding. If any of you have ever used a chat window with a help desk, you'll understand that collaborative robotics is dead in the water even now. They can't even make a chat bot that can get you past 2 questions without you screaming at your computer. And now you have to take that into technology that is literally assistive. We see great stories, things show up on like 60 Minutes or something, and this robot does this or this robot does this. That's their concepts. And these are things that in full-fledged environments, to try to get them fully implemented, we're just so far away. And I don't like when people say, well, this is going to save us. It's like a lot of the people on this call are going to be retired before this ever saves you. Like, we're so far away. I'm a huge fan, but as we found out with the internet, people said the internet's going to come in and all these people are going to lose their jobs. And all it did was magnificently blow up the amount of jobs that we have. Like, the largest hiring company in the world right now is Amazon. Amazon exists because of the internet. Like, these types of things that we get, if we come up with robotics, there's going to be 10 more jobs for every robot thing that we put out just to support the robotics and get them implemented, and how to utilize them most effectively, and who's going to repair these particular things. Like, we are just not close. And I really wish we were. And the biggest problem is we're definitely not going to have them in the services industries, because the expense that it would take to do a wide scale implementation is simply, the margins aren't there to do that. So I just feel like it's just, I'll argue anybody in any form if they want to go at me with this, but I just feel like this is just not a realistic concept.
So the robots aren't coming to the rescue, but good news for all those people who maybe were worried about their jobs, right? I mean, the jobs are going to be plentiful. You don't have to worry about that. So at least the future is bright for the workforce and those looking for jobs. And I think that's all the time we have for questions right now. Ron, thank you so much for joining us. It really was insightful, great information. I'm not sure if you've seen the comments, but people are just blowing up with how useful this was. I can see you're a lot of HR people, they needed to hear this, so they know what's going on. And it's going to be some great information for them to share with others. So thank you again. I just want to touch on a couple more points here as we wrap up. Just feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. We will, I know we didn't get to answer all of our questions, so if you have a burning question, feel free to reach out to me. You also saw Ron's information previously. Feel free to reach out to us if you've got questions. We'd love to keep following up with that. If you need help or support on staffing, recruiting, leadership training, HR, operational consulting, or even apprenticeship development program, we can help with those areas. Our goal, like I mentioned earlier, is really to help you become an employer of choice, because that is your competitive advantage more so than ever. So feel free to reach out. And as we wrap up, I do just want to mention one great opportunity we do have coming up to engage your team. That is our Leadership Summit. So this is the 12th year we've hosted our Express Leadership Summit. We've done it in person. We've done it virtually this year. It's a virtual series all month long in September. There are options for you to join individually, options for you to join as a team. We're hitting really great topics like the futurist mindset, how to navigate with uncertainty, how to develop teams in the modern workplace, leadership derailment, why safe leadership matters, and paradoxes of uncommon leaders. So that'll be a great event. We'll send some more information out on that as a follow-up as well. That's all we have for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
For 25 years at Express Employment Professionals of Grand Rapids, we believe you are more than a job. You are dreamers. You are families. You are the risk takers and the dare to believers. Whether you are starting fresh or ready to rest, we've got your job needs covered every step of the way, so you can focus on being you. Express Employment Professionals of Grand Rapids, connecting you to more than a job.